What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another edition of my Counseling Corner. My name is Lucas Seams, and today what I want to do is what I outlined in a previous video where I introduced myself, introduced this channel and this series and what I wanted to see done with it. I'm going to talk specifically about a few types of approaches to counseling, a few different theories and practices that I commonly use when I'm working with kids. These would be the same practices and approaches that you would see a lot of counselors use, whether working with kids or adults or whoever. But these are the ones that I have found the most success with. So this video is going to be focusing on one specific type of approach, one specific theory, and I'm going to explain it and kind of go over how I use it to make it relatable to your particular situation and how you can apply it in your life to just get some more satisfaction out of your life and maybe look at things a little bit differently or try to fix some problem that you may have going on. So hopefully this is helpful. I'm going to make several videos like this. Each video will focus on a specific type of counseling theory or a counseling approach. But I wanted to use this one to start with because this is probably the one that I use most often. And it's also probably one that a lot of my other approaches, a lot of the other theories are based out of. So it's really kind of the more prominent one, which is why I wanted to make this first video about this type of theory. The type of theory and the type of approach we're going to be talking about today is Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy, or REBT for short. A lot of people probably know this commonly as CBT. It's commonly referred to. There is some technical differences between REBT and CBT. I know some practitioners kind of use them interchangeably, but there are some specific differences that make them very unique and make them different. So today I'm focusing on REBT, Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy. This theory, the practitioner that you will most commonly hear referred to within this theory is Albert Ellis. He is kind of considered the person that really spearheaded this theory and this type of approach. He and along with his colleagues, of course. So if you're interested in looking up more about REBT or about Albert Ellis after you watch this video, you probably get a lot from doing that. There's tons and tons of material, information and resources out there you can read about REBT and Albert Ellis that could be very helpful for you after you watch this. So the premise of REBT is very simple on the surface, but when you really start digging into it, it can become very, very complex. The premise is this: for all of us, our thoughts are what cause our feelings. Okay, so thoughts cause feelings for short. And it's really interesting when you say that to people, especially to kids. They kind of give you this puzzled look like, what are you talking about? That thoughts don't cause my feelings. I react when people do stuff, and I get mad because so-and-so said something. And part of that is true. But just know that the main premise for this theory is that thoughts cause feelings. So whenever I get a student in my office, and if they're having an issue, if they're upset over something that's happened in their life or some incident that happened between them and a friend, I usually start by introducing this concept of thoughts cause feelings. And like I said, usually when I first introduce that, I get this look, like the deer in the headlights look, like, what are you talking about? But if you follow along with it, it really kind of makes sense, like when you really think about it. And this is the example I give to a lot of kids to illustrate that point of thoughts cause feelings. And just so you know, whenever I use the word thoughts, just be aware that I'm using that as a very broad term to kind of describe not just the day-to-day, moment-to-moment thoughts that are in our head, but it's more than just our thoughts. It's our belief system, okay? The things that we truly believe, the things that we internalize, kind of that record player that we have in our head that's constantly playing on repeat after repeat, saying the same things to us over and over again, that self-talk that we have that's just kind of permanently ingrained in our minds. Okay, so when I say thoughts, just know that that's what I'm referring to. I'm not just referring to just, a random thought that comes into your head, although that does play a part of it. But when I say thoughts in terms of this theory, this REBT, this approach, I'm using thoughts as a very broad term to describe our overall belief system, if that makes sense. So one example that I give to illustrate this point is this, and this works particularly well with kids and with students. If you have two students, let's say you have student number 1 and student number 2, okay? If student number 1 has always been a straight A student, every test, every homework assignment, every project, all they've ever done is gotten A's on everything. Okay, every report card, everything they've done, they've gotten an A. Okay, so that's student number one. And student number two is on the completely different end of the spectrum. Student number two has always made straight D's and F's. Okay, has never made anything above, let's say, a D. D's and F's on every test, every homework assignment, every project. They've probably been held back and had to repeat some grades. Maybe they maybe try hard at school, but for whatever reason, something's just not clicking for them. Okay, because they always keep making awful grades, F's and D's all over. Now, if student number one and student number two are both in the same, let's say, math class, okay, and they both come into the same math class, and the teacher says, "Guess what, class? Pop quiz day. Everyone get your pens and pencils out. We're going to take a pop quiz." So everyone, all the students won't grumble, "Oh, pop quizzes." So they both take the same exact quiz, okay? And if both those students get a C, let's say it's a C plus, okay? Both students get a C plus on the test. How do you think they're going to react? What do you think the difference is going to be in the way the students number one and student number two react? Obviously, student number one is going to have a very negative reaction. Okay, they're going to be very upset. They're going to feel disappointed. They're going to feel down on themselves. They're going to feel a lot of things, but none of those things are going to be very good. Okay, they're going to be frustrated. They're going to, just not be very happy with themselves. And if you look at student number two is going to have a very different feeling. Student number two is going to be probably excited. They're going to feel very happy. They're going to have a lot of good feelings, whereas student number one had a lot of bad or a lot of negative feelings. And the reason I use that example is to illustrate it wasn't the C on the test. It wasn't the event. It wasn't the test, and it wasn't the earning of the C that caused them to feel those things. Because if it was, then they both would have had the same feeling, because they both experienced the same thing. Okay? So the reason that students number one and number two feel differently about that is because they think differently about it. They internalize it differently. Their perceptions are different. So student number one may think something like, "Oh man, I really didn't study. I really bombed this test. I failed. I'm a failure and I'm an awful student because I didn't make above a C. I didn't make an A like I usually do." That's maybe an example of something student number one is going to think. Now student number two is going to think, "Wow, I got a C. That's the best grade I've ever gotten. I really earned that C. You know what? Finally, things are starting to work for me. I'm getting the hang of this, and I'm doing better. I'm becoming a good student. I'm making better grades, and that's just awesome." Okay, so and that's what student number two is going to think. So you can see how their thoughts or their beliefs, what they're telling themselves, okay, that self-talk is determining what they're feeling. Okay, so that's the example I use with students, and as I start to explain that, you can usually kind of see on their face that they're starting to get it. So the way that I would take this even further is I would probably pull out my whiteboard, which I'm going to do here in a second, to kind of illustrate how they can apply this to their situation. Okay? And one thing I always tell students is this. If you want to feel better, so if we know that thoughts cause feelings, and if you want to feel better about something, in order to do that, you have to think better. Because if thoughts cause feelings, if we want to feel better, we got to think better. Okay, so this is how I show that. Get my whiteboard out here. Alright. Okay. So now if I'm working with a student, if I'm showing them REBT, I'm going to draw some kind of chart that's going to look something like this. Okay? Now what I'll do is I'll have them start by listing the bad feelings that they're currently experiencing. So a lot of times kids will say, "I feel bad, I feel sad, or I feel angry." Okay? There are several that they might come up with. Those are just a few. And I apologize ahead of time for my awful handwriting. And I always tell students, the goal, what I want for you is this. Instead of feeling all these bad things, I want you to feel better, okay? Whatever better looks like for you, because better means different things for different people. I want you to feel better than what you're feeling right now. In order to do that, Again, we have to think better. So, after they give me these bad feelings that they're experiencing, I will usually have them list all of the thoughts that they're currently telling themselves that are causing these feelings. And, I could go through and write some make-believe ones here, but there are two, well, they're kind of the same thing, but two main thoughts that I hear almost every single time. And they usually boil down to something like this. It's these two right here. It's terrible, and I can't stand it. Okay, those are the two I hear more often than any other things. It's terrible, or it may be it's awful. Okay, something to that effect. And then the other one is usually I can't stand it. Whatever's happening, I just can't stand it. I can't handle it. It's too much. Something to that effect. So what I would do is I would go in and I would dispute these two thoughts, because these two thoughts are usually not true. Okay, and usually I work with the students. I'll try to dispute these things. And I'll show you how I do that here in a second. So let's start with I can't stand it. The thing I always tell students, and I do this as kind of a way to kind of liven up the session. It's kind of funny and it's kind of goofy to do this, but it really works if it's done right. As I'll say, go ahead and check your pulse for me. And then you go like this. It's like, do you feel your heartbeat? Okay, you feel your heartbeat. Good. Put your hand on your chest. Now take a deep breath. Are your lungs working? Great, your lungs are working. So your heart's beating, your lungs are working. That tells me one thing. You're alive. Okay? You're not a zombie, you're not asleep, you're not in a coma, you're alive, you're sitting here talking with me. Therefore, you are standing it. Okay? The fact that we're sitting here talking about it and you're trying to process through it, that is you standing it.